Ladies and gentlemen, have you ever wondered what happens after you die? Well, that very topic has been the subject of many works of literature throughout time, and you're going to learn about one of those today. That one is Dante Alighieri's Divine Comedy. Who was Dante, you may be wondering? Dante was an Italian. He was a Florentine, in fact. He was born into a noble family in Florence. He was well educated and was involved in politics of the city-state. While he was away in Rome, a rival political faction took over the city-state. And you'll remember from your studies of the Middle Ages that Italy was not the country that it is today. It was made up of a bunch of different city-states, so it was not a cohesive country in the way it is in modern times. When he came back, he was exiled from Florence, and he wrote the Divine Comedy in exile. And there is actually a lot of political undertones to the Divine Comedy. Where and when did he live? Well, you already know that he lived in Florence, Italy, and the top left picture here shows you Florence in 2012. He was born in 1265 and lived to 1321. In the picture to the right, you can see one of the major bridges there. That's the one that goes through the middle of Florence. It actually has shops on it. The one on the bottom left, that's me in Florence at night. It was a little chilly then, but you can see how small the buildings are and how it still looks like such an old city. And on the lower right, that is the Duomo. That's the major cathedral in Florence that was built in the Middle Ages. The vernacular. You may be wondering what language the Inferno was written in. It was not written in English. It in fact was written in Dante's vernacular, which was a sort of a Tuscan dialect. Tuscany is the region in Italy where Florence is. And back then, the official language of the Roman Catholic Church, which was ruling the Italian city-states, was Latin. But regular people didn't read Latin. Dante made sort of a splash because he wrote in the vernacular, which was the language of the ordinary people, even though most people thought that the vernacular was inferior to Latin. In contrast to other people, Dante thought that even the highest forms of expression, including epic poetry and discussions about divinity, could be written in the vernacular. But elitists believed, so these would be the people like the priests and the people high up in politics, believed that anything written in the vernacular was trivial, meaning it was sort of low, it was not of anything special, not of any important value, or couldn't really speak to the major concerns of being a human. So Dante was one of the first authors to use the vernacular, and his book actually gained a larger and wider audience in Italy than it otherwise would have had it been written in Latin. An epic poem, you already know what an epic poem is, but just to refresh, an epic poem is a long story that is written in poetic form, and it usually discusses the journey of a hero throughout time. And there are a lot of epic conventions. We talked about some of them before, like epithets. So that would be like Dante the Brilliant, etc. How have epic poems traditionally been transmitted? We've talked about that, how the epic poem is transmitted through the oral tradition, through one generation telling it to the next. And the storytellers remember these long and complicated stories by having a basic framework for the story, and then by using certain techniques to remember some of the phrases. That's where the epithets come in. That's also why there's a lot of repetition. It's so that because the repetition helps the storytellers to remember what the basic plot of the story is. You also may be wondering why this is a comedy, because it's all about going to hell and purgatory, which according to Catholic tradition is sort of the middle ground where people go if they are not yet ready to get into heaven, but don't really deserve to go to hell either. But in the classical sense, the term comedy refers to works that reflect a belief in an ordered, good universe. So it doesn't mean that the poem ends happily. Rather, the fact that it's a comedy means that God is in control and that he makes everything return to order in the end. So it's not a happy, jubilant ending, but it's an orderly ending, one that God would have wanted. And you can see on the right here the circles of hell. And so Dante imagines 9 levels of hell, going from bad to worse. You can see up at the top is limbo, so people who are sort of in between, should maybe go, are waiting to see where they go. So the bottom is treachery, so that's betrayal, which Dante, we can see, thought was the very worst kind of sin. The Divine Comedy is also an allegory, and an allegory is a figurative work that has one meaning on the surface, a superficial meaning, and then a secondary symbolic or metaphorical meaning. So you can see that some examples include The Lord of the Flies, which you may have read, and Animal Farm, which you may read as well. Now, you can see that there's an alligator here. So the figurative style known as allegory, yes, it's not related to alligators, but you could envision in an allegory that the alligators represent evil forces snapping at humanity. So in that case, if the alligator helps you to remember what an allegory is, then go for that. It's also, one good way to think about it is it's like a metaphor on steroids. So everything in the story doesn't just mean what it means on the surface, it represents something much, much deeper. If you've read some of Aesop's fables, you may be familiar with allegories, but we'll see as we read how all of Dante's Divine Comedy is an allegory. So it's not just talking about the surface, it's also getting at a lot of deeper meanings about morals and deeper truths about humanity. An allusion is a brief indirect reference to a person, place, or event, often in real life, literature, history, or art. For example, and this is from vocabulary.com, you could say, I obviously am no expert at love, which would be an allusion to failed relationships. So it's something that you're not saying directly, but that is implied and is a reference. So an allusion is something that's quick. It's a brief hint, and it brings something up for the person who's reading it, but it doesn't get into that subject. And we'll see that there are many allusions in the Divine Comedy, a lot of them to things that we have studied in mythology. A symbol you're probably familiar with could be an object, shape, sign, or character that is used to represent something else. A flag is a symbol of a country, and courtesy of vocabulary.com, we find out that English teachers never tire of talking about symbols. The rhyme scheme in the Inferno is called terza rima, and it's a rhyme scheme that Dante made up. It is 3-line stanzas. The first and the third line are the same, and the middle line is different. And then the middle line becomes the first and the third in the next one. So that's called ABA, BCB, CDC, and DED, and so on. And Dante is presumed to have picked the number 3 because the number 3 is very important in Catholicism, and the Holy Trinity is a group of 3, the Father, Son, and the Holy Spirit. So our version in English doesn't actually rhyme in the way that the original in the vernacular would have, but we can see that it is a nice, neat rhyme. The format of the Divine Comedy is a trilogy. It's made of 3 canticles or books. The first one is the Inferno, which is hell. The second one is Purgatorio, which is purgatory, sort of the holding place. And then Paradiso is our last one. That is paradise or heaven. And again, here you'll see the number 3. Each book has 33 cantos or chapters, except the Inferno, which has 34, and the total number is 100, which for some reason was seen as the perfect number in the Middle Ages. Beatrice is a figure who comes up in the poem, and we will read about her. She was a woman that Dante adored from afar in Florence. You might think that it was a little bit obsessive in today's terms, because according to the legend, Dante first met Beatrice when he was 9 and she was 8. And he claims that he met her once more 9 years later. So you can see clearly Dante has some fascination with the number 9. So that makes us wonder, do we really believe those 9 years? That's a little too perfectly symmetrical. They didn't marry each other. Both were already destined to marry other people. Their parents had arranged this from when they were very young. And Beatrice actually died when she was 24 and Dante was 25. And even though Dante married and had children with another woman, he was still fascinated and probably a little bit obsessed with Beatrice. And so here we go. The story begins when Dante awakens one night to find himself alone and lost in the dark wood. He doesn't know how he got there or where to go. But then a guide, the Roman poet Virgil, comes to his rescue. And Virgil finds Dante in the woods on the evening of Good Friday in the year 1300. And Virgil actually guides Dante through his religious pilgrimage. And as we said before, Dante goes with Virgil through hell and purgatory, and Beatrice actually guides him through paradise. Virgil was a pagan, so he could not enter paradise. Enjoy this. Sounds like an appealing offer, huh? And the descent into hell begins if Dante and Virgil go through the wide gates of hell, and they descend through those 9 circles. And in each circle, they see sinners being punished for their sins on earth. So you can see here up at the top is limbo, where people sort of wait until they are assigned to another level. And Dante actually sees the torture that people endure as a sort of divine justice. So he doesn't feel pity for them so much as understand that they are where they are because they deserved it, and God is punishing them for what they have done. So you can see that the first circle is limbo, then there is lust, then there is gluttony. The fourth one is hoarders and spenders, and you can see that the punishments nicely line up with the sins that the people had committed. So the hoarders push boulders to the center, the spenders are forced to push the boulders back out of the center. So it's sort of an endless cycle reminiscent of Sisyphus. The fifth circle is wrathfulness and being sullen. And then in the sixth circle, we have the heretics. Those are the people who went against the church and said things that opposed the teachings of the church. The seventh one is violence, suicide, and blasphemy, sodomy, and usurers, which looks pretty unpleasant. These people are condemned to a desert of blazing sand with a constant rain of fire. The eighth circle is full of terrible people, including the hypocrites, the thieves, flatterers, corrupt politicians, which I think is a very interesting category, that those people are a category unto themselves. And then the ninth circle, the pit of hell, the betrayers of kin, country. We have specifically Brutus, who killed Julius Caesar, Cassius, and Judas Iscariot, who was believed to have betrayed Jesus. We also have betrayers of guests and betrayers of benefactors. And as we'll see, we will meet some betrayers of kin as we read. Unfortunately, these people are lodged headfirst in blocks of ice. Ow.